Hello, I'm David Lindsley. This video is based on my presentation at the Book of Mormon Expo in Eagle Mountain, Utah in October 2024. I presented a brief overview of the various witnesses for the Book of Mormon occurring in America's heartland. I believe the Book of Mormon is an actual history of great civilizations that lived and died. So, if it's true, where did it actually take place? There are many theories, but I want to look at inspired sources who know the truth. Are there any statements from church leaders? Yes, there are. Here are several examples. In 1833, Joseph Smith penned a letter to the editor of the American Revivalist in which he described the Book of Mormon.
The Book of Mormon is a record of the forefathers of our western tribes of Indians. By it we learn that our western tribes of Indians are descendants from that Joseph that was sold into Egypt, and that the land of America is a promised land unto them.
Years later, Joseph Smith wrote another letter to answer questions about the Book of Mormon. Joseph lived in Illinois at the time and clearly stated which country the descendants of the Lamanites lived in.
They were principally Israelites of the descendants of Joseph. The Jaredites were destroyed about the time that the Israelites came from Jerusalem, who succeeded them in the inheritance of the country. The principal nation of the second race fell in battle towards the close of the 4th century. The remnant are the Indians that now inhabit this country.
In his book, Doctrines of Salvation, published in 1954, President Joseph Fielding Smith specifically wrote about the location of the Nephite lands.
Within recent years, there has arisen among certain students of the Book of Mormon a theory to the effect that within the period covered by the Book of Mormon, the Nephites and Lamanites were confined almost entirely within the borders of the territory comprising Central America and the southern portion of Mexico. This modernistic theory of necessity, in order to be consistent, must place the waters of Ripliancum and the hill Cumorah someplace within the restricted territory of Central America, notwithstanding the teachings of the Church to the contrary for upwards of 100 years. Because of this theory, some members of the Church have become confused and greatly disturbed in their faith in the Book of Mormon. It is for this reason that evidence is here presented to show that it is not only possible that these places could be located as the Church has held during the past century, but that in very deed such is the case. From all the evidence in the Book of Mormon, augmented by the testimony of the prophet Joseph Smith, these final battles took place in the territory known as the United States and in the neighborhood of the Great Lakes and hills of western New York.
More recently, Elder L. Tom Perry had this to say.
The United States is the promised land foretold in the Book of Mormon.
From May to June 1834, Joseph led a contingent from Kirtland, Ohio to Missouri called the Zion's Camp March. During this trek, Joseph wrote a letter to his wife Emma, which reads, in part,
The whole of our journey, in the midst of so large a company of social, honest, and sincere men, wandering over the plains of the Nephites, recounting occasionally the history of the Book of Mormon, roving over the mounds of that once beloved people of the Lord, picking up their skulls and their bones as a proof of its divine authenticity.
On June 2, 1834, while on Zion's Camp March, Joseph Smith Jr., along with several other men, crossed the Illinois River and camped on the west bank. The following morning, Joseph and some of the brethren visited a prominent mound on top of the bluffs overlooking the Illinois River.
The brethren procured a shovel and a hoe, and removing the earth to the depth of about 1 foot, discovered the skeleton of a man, almost entire, and between his ribs the stone point of a Lamanitish arrow, which evidently produced his death. the visions of the past being opened to my understanding by the Spirit of the Almighty, I discovered that the person whose skeleton was before us was a white Lamanite, a large, thick-set man and a man of God. His name was Zelph. He was a warrior and chieftain under the great prophet Onondagas, who was known from the hill Cumorah, or Eastern Sea, to the Rocky Mountains. He was killed in battle by the arrow found among his ribs during the last great struggle with the Lamanites and Nephites.
Notice that Joseph said that Zelph was known from the hill Cumorah, or Eastern Sea, to the Rocky Mountains. So Joseph specifically identified where the Eastern Sea of the Book of Mormon was located. Here is the hill Cumorah, and the easternmost of the Great Lakes right next to it is Lake Ontario, or Eastern Sea. Because Joseph labeled Lake Ontario as the Eastern Sea, we can identify the remaining Great Lakes with the names used in the Book of Mormon. Even though Joseph received the plates at the hill Cumorah in New York, some people speculate that there was a second hill Cumorah located in Central America. Is it correct that there were two hill Cumorahs? We look to our Latter-day Prophets again for an answer to this question.
In the western part of the state of New York near Palmyra is a prominent hill known as Hill Cumorah. On July the 25th of this year, as I stood on the crest of that hill, admiring the awe-inspiring and breathtaking panorama which stretched out before me on every hand, my mind reverted to the events which occurred in that vicinity some 25 centuries ago, events which brought to an end the great Jaredite nation. This second civilization of which I refer, the Nephites, flourished in America between 600 BC and 400 AD. Their civilization came to an end for the same reason, at the same place, and in the same manner as did the Jaredites.
President Brigham Young has said this.
When Joseph got the plates, the angel instructed him to carry them back to the hill Cumorah, which he did. Oliver says that when Joseph and Oliver went there, the hill opened, and they walked into a cave, in which there was a large and spacious room.
Brigham further described that there were wagon loads of records in the room, which indicates that this was where Mormon placed all the Nephite records that he had gathered. In April 1953 General Conference, Elder Mark E. Peterson of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles very specifically said this.
I do not believe that there were two hill Cumorahs, one in Central America and the other one up in New York, for the convenience of the prophet Joseph Smith, so that the poor boy would not have to walk clear to Central America to get the gold plates.
Here is a 1990 reply from President Gordon B. Hinckley to a letter inquiring where the hill Cumorah was located. The Church has long maintained, as attested to by references in the writings of general authorities, that the hill Cumorah in western New York State is the same as referenced in the Book of Mormon. Here is a reply from Joseph Fielding Smith to a 1949 letter inquiring where the hill Cumorah was located. The hill Cumorah is in western New York where the prophet received the plates. It has never been removed except by a bunch of modern critics. Two hill Cumorahs? I believe the question has been answered by our prophets and apostles, and that the hill in New York where Joseph got the plates is the same hill Cumorah described in the Book of Mormon. There's only one. Where did the Book of Mormon take place? The answers from prophets and apostles seem pretty clear. According to Joseph Smith and others, the Nephite nation was in the area of the eastern half of the United States, mainly around the Great Lakes region. This is known as the Heartland model. Here is the Heartland model and the various lands that the Nephites traveled over the space of nearly 1,000 years. There are thousands of ancient artifacts that also witness for the Heartland. Throughout the 1800s, as pioneers journeyed westward and settled the new frontier in America, farmers would often find various items buried in the earth as they worked their fields. Items such as arrowheads and pottery, copper, mica, and slate, pipes, carvings, even coins, all scattered throughout the land. Other artifacts were found by both professional archaeologists and local residents as they excavated some of the hundreds of ancient mounds scattered throughout the Mississippi and Ohio valleys. As soon as they began showing the artifacts to experts, they were immediately dismissed as fakes. Why? According to the experts, there were no established cultures in America before Columbus, and certainly not ones with written language and advanced artistic skills. The experts would not consider any other explanation or give the artifacts serious study. They maintained the opinion that anything that indicated ancient civilization in America must be fake. Unfortunately, because of this, many artifacts were simply thrown away, although photographs exist showing the variety of the pieces as shown here. Other artifacts have been destroyed due to careless handling and shipping. Some have been pilfered, and their whereabouts are unknown. Only a fraction of the artifacts that originally found still remain. Several artifacts show battle scenes between two distinct armies, as we can see by their different clothing and weapons. For comparison, how did Mormon describe the Nephite and Lamanite armies?
And when the armies of the Lamanites saw that the people of Nephi, or that Moroni, had prepared his people with breastplates and with arm shields, yea, and also shields to defend their heads, and also they were dressed with thick clothing. Now the army of Zarahemnah was not prepared with any such thing. They had only their swords and their scimitars, their bows and their arrows, their stones and their slings. And they were naked, save it were a skin which was girded about their loins.
This slate shows two opposing armies lined up facing each other. The soldiers on the left have knee-length tunics, helmets, and are armed with spears. The warriors on the right appear barely dressed, wearing feather headdresses and armed with bows and arrows. Here is another slate showing two opposing armies. The group on the left has helmets and spears and carries banners. The army on the right is wearing feather headdresses and also armed with spears. Here's another slate showing two armies. Here the main difference is the head covering shown on each army. And another. Again, the group on the left has helmets and bows, while those on the right are wearing feather headdresses and armed with spears. The artifacts give us clear indications that two distinctive armies battled each other, perhaps frequently. The Burroughs cave stones from Illinois have many depictions of people and warriors too. These warriors have helmets, long clothing, and weapons. Could these be Nephites?
Now the heads of the Lamanites were shorn, and they were naked, save it were skin which was girded about their loins.
Here are several stones from the Burroughs cave that match the description that Mormon gave of Lamanites.
And we did take our tents and whatsoever things were possible for us, and did journey in the wilderness for the space of many days. And after we had journeyed for the space of many days, we did pitch our tents. And my people would that we should call the name of the place Nephi, wherefore we did call it Nephi.
putting Lehi's first landing in the Florida area, then it seems possible that Nephi followed the river northward a great distance to find a suitable place to begin a new settlement. In 1934, the Tennessee Valley Authority was constructing a dam which would flood a portion of the Clinch River in eastern Tennessee. Because the area to be flooded included a Hopewell mound, a group of archaeologists were called in to excavate the site before the dam was completed. The archaeologists made an amazing discovery when they uncovered the ruins of a large stone and wood structure. Here is an article from 1935 about the discovery. Archaeologists digging in the Tennessee Valley, not far from Norris Dam, recently unearthed an ancient temple site with 17 well-preserved skeletons resting on platforms of hard clay. It is impossible to tell just how long ago the temple was built, but the conditions of certain pieces of cedar wood found with the clay of the temple indicates beyond a reasonable doubt that the humans whose remains were found in the ruins of the structure lived and died several hundred years before Columbus set sail. The remains of ancient American Indians, supposed to be chieftains, were found near the temple. These head men are believed by archaeologists to have led hordes of their people over the country long before Columbus arrived. Here's another photo and article. An aerial view of the complete ancient temple, the first of its kind ever found in the United States, and which was unearthed by archaeological expedition headed by Professor W.S. Webb recently. The temple, found in almost perfect condition, was located about 30 miles above the Norris Dam site in the Tennessee Basin. It dates back hundreds of years before Columbus discovered America and antedates the Cherokee Indians. The Book of Mormon gives us a possible explanation for the discovery of the temple site in Tennessee.
And I, Nephi, did build a temple, and I did construct it after the manner of the temple of Solomon, save it were not built of so many precious things. For they were not to be found upon the land, wherefore it could not be built like unto Solomon's temple. But the manner of the construction was like unto the temple of Solomon, and the workmanship thereof was exceedingly fine.
Today, the area is completely submerged by water as part of the Tennessee Valley Authority project. As the United States expanded westward from the original 13 colonies, interest in settling the frontier grew. In 1848, the Smithsonian Institution commissioned Ephraim Squire and Edwin Davis to survey the ancient earthworks that were widely discovered throughout the Ohio Valley and adjacent areas. The region surveyed primarily focused on Ohio, Indiana, and Tennessee, but did not extend west of the Mississippi River or into the Deep South. The team performed careful measurements, sketched each earthwork as it appeared, often with cross-section views to show height and depth, and included a written description of the site. It contained 306 pages, 48 lithographed maps and plates, and 207 illustrations. In 1849, Ephraim Squire also published Aboriginal Monuments of New York. This volume contains surveys of earthworks in New York State around Lake Ontario. It demonstrated the same level of detail as the previous work for the Smithsonian. In the surveys, there were 3 different types of enclosures found. Large areas fortified with ditches and embankments, large areas of circle and square shapes that were not fortified, very small fortified areas that appear constructed simply, maybe very quickly. Also shown here is a standard 300-foot-long football field for size reference. Here are 4 of the many defensive enclosures documented around present-day Ohio. These are large, heavily fortified enclosures up to 145 acres in size. Many of them have an obvious boundary of a ditch next to a raised embankment around the perimeter, and are usually constructed along natural bluffs and waterways. This is exactly the way Captain Moroni fortified Nephite cities as described in the Book of Mormon, circa 72 BC.
Yea, he had been strengthening the armies of the Nephites, throwing up banks of earth round about to enclose his armies, and also building walls of stone to encircle them about, round about their cities and the borders of their lands, yea, all round about the land.
Let's look more at those ditches and embankments.
And now it came to pass that Moroni caused that his army should commence in digging up heaps of earth round about all the cities, throughout all the land which was possessed by the Nephites. Thus Moroni did prepare strongholds against the coming of their enemies, round about every city in all the land.
The wall structures have long disappeared, and erosion has diminished the berms and ditches, but evidence was plentiful in the 1800s as recorded by the surveyors. The surveyors found many examples of a ditch and wall combination around the enclosures. I colored the walls in green and the ditches in red. Notice ditch on the outside and wall on the inside. Same with this one. This one has a double wall with a ditch in between. 2 walls and 2 ditches. And another. And another. And another. And another. And another. There are many more, but I'll stop here. Let's look briefly at the style of buildings mentioned in the Book of Mormon and consider whether or not we might find remnants today.
And I did teach my people to build buildings, and to work in all manner of wood, and of iron, and of copper, and of brass, and of steel, and of gold, and of silver, and of precious ores, which were in great abundance, that in time they might have timber to build their houses, yea, their cities, and their temples, and their synagogues, and their sanctuaries, and all manner of their buildings. And thus they did enable the people in the land northward, that they might build many cities, both of wood and of cement.
Notice that they had built cities of wood and cement. There is no mention of stones. Hugh Nibley traveled the world and personally inspected temples in Egypt, Central America, and studied the Middle East. Concerning remnants of the Book of Mormon, he wrote,
Blinded by the gold of pharaohs and the mighty ruins of Babylon, Book of Mormon students have declared themselves not interested in the drab and commonplace remains of our lowly Indians. But in all the Book of Mormon we look in vain for anything that promises majestic ruins.
In other words, there is nothing in the Book of Mormon that says they built huge and majestic buildings and pyramids. Let's briefly look at references to seasons, such as the phrases driven snow, heat of the day, and whirlwinds. Different seasons imply locations many hundreds of miles away from the equator. Near the equator, the temperatures are nearly constant, and there is really only one season, summer. One of the references to seasons is this passage, which shows that Nephite agriculture had seasons for planting and harvesting.
For the earth was smitten that it was dry, and did not yield forth grain in the season of grain, and the whole earth was smitten.
It appears that ripe grain was available only at a specific season, not year-round. From several passages of scriptures, we learn that the Nephites were familiar with the seasonal temperature changes.
And the whiteness thereof did exceed the whiteness of the driven snow.
Nephi likens a whiteness to the driven snow, which implies more than a little dusting. He wrote this on the small plates he made after living in the Promised Land for several decades. He was familiar with many years of weather changes.
Sleep had overpowered them because of their much fatigue, which was caused by the labors and heat of the day.
The specific mention of heat of the day used here to indicate that this period of warfare was different than other times when high heat was not mentioned. This implies seasonal temperature changes.
And there were some who died with fevers, which at some seasons of the year were very frequent in the land. But not so much so with fevers, because of the excellent qualities of the many plants and roots which God had prepared to remove the cause of diseases, to which men were subject by the nature of the climate.
This verse tells us two things relevant to seasons. One, that the land experienced seasons, and two, that illnesses were more common at certain times of the year. The majority of North America experiences 4 seasons. Central America, being close to the equator, has only one, summer, all year round. The specific mention of fevers could be a reference to malaria, which is carried and spread by mosquitoes in warm weather. When we think of a region with malaria, we don't usually think of North America, but malaria was common in the United States until 1951. The early saints who settled Nauvoo were initially affected with malaria from mosquitoes in the swampy land. This map from 1870 shows the severity of malaria cases across the United States in the summer. Therefore, having seasons with fevers fits the health history of North America. Closer to the equator, the risk of malaria is year-round. There is no change of seasons in Central America. The next scripture mentions several extreme weather and geologic events, most of which are common all over the world. Whirlwinds or tornadoes, however, are more localized to specific regions.
But behold, there was a more great and terrible destruction in the land northward. For behold, the whole face of the land was changed, because of the tempest and the whirlwinds, and the thunderings and the lightnings, and the exceedingly great quaking of the whole earth.
Here is a map showing the potential for tornadoes in the United States. The Mississippi and Ohio valleys are referred to as Tornado Alley. This map shows historical frequency of tornadoes throughout the world. Notice the extremely high concentration in the eastern half of the United States. Also note the lack of tornadoes in Central America. Let's talk about the appearance of written language on the artifacts. Since we are correlating with information given in the Book of Mormon, what might we expect the language to look like? The Book of Mormon further tells us that the brass plates were written in Egyptian.
For it were not possible that our father Lehi could have remembered all these things, to have taught them to his children, except it were for the help of these plates. For he having been taught in the language of the Egyptians, therefore he could read these engravings, and teach them to his children, that thereby they could teach them to their children, and so fulfilling the commandments of God, even down to this present time.
After almost a millennia of being in the Promised Land, the prophet Mormon records that the Nephites were still using a form of Egyptian in their writings.
And now, behold, we have written this record according to our knowledge, in the characters which are called among us the Reformed Egyptian, being handed down and altered by us according to our manner of speech. And if our plates had been sufficiently large, we should have written in Hebrew. But the Hebrew hath been altered by us also. And if we could have written in Hebrew, behold, ye would have had no imperfection in our record.
This plate is a good example of the writings typically seen on the Michigan plates and clay tablets. Their characters are a strange combination of some Egyptian-looking characters, some ancient Hebrew, and some completely unknown characters. This combination seems to match the description that Mormon gave when he described the plates he was writing on. Here are 2 stones from the Burroughs Cave that show examples of writing. The so-called mystic symbol or name of God, which is so prevalent on the Michigan tablets, is also shown on both of these stones. The Book of Mormon says that the Nephites constructed buildings and roads, planted and harvested crops, and built ships. All of these require tools, especially metal tools. In the land of Nephi, the prophet Nephi and his people established a community with permanent structures and agriculture.
And I did teach my people to build buildings, and to work in all manner of wood, and of iron, and of copper, and of brass, and of steel, and of gold, and of silver, and of precious ores, which were in great abundance.
Later, in the Book of Mormon history, the Nephites built ships and obviously used tools in the construction process.
And it came to pass that Hagoth built him an exceedingly large ship on the borders of the land Bountiful, by the land Desolation, and launched it forth into the West Sea, by the narrow neck which led into the land northward.
Here are samples of the many copper tools found in Michigan. In 1830, the accepted scientific thought was that horses and the wheel did not exist in North America until after Europeans arrived in the 1500s. When the Book of Mormon was published, it was mocked because it mentions horses and chariots.
Now when Lamoni had heard this, he caused that his servants should make ready his horses and his chariots.
This Michigan plate clearly shows a carriage or chariot pulled by horses. Here is a carriage that appears to be a funeral hearse being drawn by 2 horses. Here is a chariot with 2 horses. Here is a stone from the Burroughs Cave that also shows a horse and a chariot. Here is a recent article concerning evidence of horses in North America. New research rewrites the history of American horses. Native Americans spread the animals across the West before Europeans arrived in the region. Just like horses and chariots, it was accepted as fact in Joseph Smith's day that there weren't any elephants in North America, ancient or modern. And yet the Book of Mormon gives us truth that wasn't commonly known.
And they also had horses and asses, and there were elephants and curlums and cumums, all of which were useful unto man, and more especially the elephants and curlums and cumums.
Some have speculated that perhaps curlums and cumums were mastodons and woolly mammoths. Those prehistoric animals may not have been in Joseph's vocabulary as he was translating the Book of Mormon, so he used the original untranslated words. There are many images of elephants on the Michigan plates. Here are just a few. Here is an elephant from Burroughs Cave. This image shows the elephant wearing a riding saddle and harness. On the right are 2 metal coins with elephant heads. Another elephant from Burroughs Cave. This one is pulling a log or something similar. If someone was trying to pass off fake artifacts as real, I don't think drawing something so obviously wrong as elephants would have been a very good idea. While digging along a dried-up riverbed in northern Florida, a team of paleontologists and volunteers from the Florida Museum of Natural History unearthed a collection of bones from an elephant species that lived in the region during the Miocene epoch. Fortunately, several of the ancient elephant skeletons recovered were virtually intact, including one skeleton from a full-grown adult. This gave paleontologists a unique opportunity to study the anatomy of a huge and fascinating creature that once freely roamed North America, just like modern elephants wander across Africa today. (1901) Levi Wood, a Hillsdale County farmer, found an entire mastodon skeleton, including the contents of the 10,000-year-old animal's stomach, while digging a drainage ditch through a swamp on his land. The skeleton was on display at the U.S. National Museum in Washington, D.C. mastodon bones discovered in Bellevue, Michigan in 2014. Preliminary examination indicates that the animal may have been butchered by humans, stated University of Michigan paleontologist Daniel Fisher. This plate from the Michigan collection has it all: horses, chariots, and elephants. It shows a charging chariot and many soldiers throwing spears and chasing after elephants. Here is a line drawing. There are hunters ready with bows and arrows and with spears. The chariot driver has the horses at full gallop, which gives the scene great action. At the bottom is a fallen elephant and at least 3 more on the right still being pursued. For fun, I recreated this scene in 3D. Adding color and dimension helped me to see a glimpse into the life of these people from so long ago. The Book of Mormon mentions that the people had copper tools, iron, horses, elephants, other beasts of burden, chariots, and wagons with wheels, all of which are portrayed on the Michigan artifacts and Burroughs Cave stones. In contrast, a 2024 report by Popular Archaeology concluded that the ancient Mesoamerica people used only stone tools, had no chariots or wheeled vehicles, and no beasts of burden. It seems that the Mesoamerican location of the Book of Mormon should be eliminated easily based on the variety of evidences provided. The Heartland model correlates with the Book of Mormon with evidences of Egyptian or Hebrew writing, whereas the writings found in Central America have no similarity to either Egyptian or Hebrew. North America has seasons, snow, and tornadoes. There is an absence of tornadoes in Central America. No snow, no changes of seasons. Plenty of evidence of ditch and wall defensive structures in North America. In Central America, there are no examples of any ditch and wall defensive structures. And none of the many buildings in Central America match the description of Solomon's Temple. And only one hill, Cumorah. As President Joseph Fielding Smith said, because of the Central American theory, some members of the church have become confused and greatly disturbed in their faith in the Book of Mormon. Because of the supposed lack of physical evidence, some believe that the Book of Mormon is no better than a fairy tale. The real proof of where the Nephites lived is not in the small details and physical evidences, although abundant, but in the testimonies borne by great men such as Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, and others who have testified over the years that the Book of Mormon occurred in North America. Please visit my website, davidlindsley.com. There I have several works of art, also several handmade replicas of Michigan artifacts. And you will find links to all my free YouTube videos where I go into much more detail showing the evidences of the Book of Mormon transpiring in North America. The Heartland Artifact series show many examples of ancient artifacts found over the years. I also have a book titled The Land Northward. This 200-page full-color book describes the land northward and southward, the location of the narrow neck, along with the likely path the Nephites traveled from first landing to their eventual destruction at the hill Cumorah. In it, I correlate American artifacts with the Book of Mormon and much, much more. I also have an app called The Land Northward. This app for iOS and Android contains a wealth of Heartland info at your fingertips, such as maps of Hopewell Mound locations, 1848 surveys of ancient monuments, an artifacts gallery, and a digital version of the Land Northward book. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed watching this and will share it with your friends.